The people in these photos may be unbelievable, but there are even more unusual, rare, and extraordinary people in history. Get ready. Robert Wadlow wasn't just tall, he was colossal. Standing at an unbelievable 8 feet 11 inches, he remains the tallest human ever recorded. Born in 1918 in Alton, Illinois, Robert's height wasn't obvious at first, but by the time he was 5 years old, he was already taller than most grown men. His growth never slowed down, driven by a condition called gigantism, which caused his pituitary gland to release way too much growth hormone. By age 8, he was wearing clothes meant for adults and shaking hands with celebrities. At 13, he towered over his teachers. His size was so extreme that he needed custom-made shoes that were over 18 inches long. Everything about Robert was larger than life. He had a soft voice, a gentle presence, and never let his size stop him from living fully. He loved reading, photography, and even joined the Boy Scouts, with a tent and sleeping bag specially made just for him. Despite needing leg braces and constant medical care, Robert traveled the country with the Ringling Brothers and later with a shoe company that sponsored him. He greeted crowds, took pictures with fans, and became a symbol of strength and uniqueness. People weren't just amazed by his height, they were drawn to his calm and kind personality. Photos from the time show him next to average-height adults who barely reach his waist. The contrast is jaw-dropping, and it's no wonder people couldn't believe their eyes when they met him in person. Even today, people still visit his statue in Alton, marveling at how someone like him could really exist. His story is unforgettable, not just because of how tall he was, but because of how he lived that height with grace. At first glance, people thought they were seeing a miracle. A living, breathing woman with no head. Betty Lou Williams was known across sideshows as the Headless Girl, and the illusion was so convincing it stopped crowds in their tracks. Born in 1932, Betty had a rare medical condition that left her body severely deformed. But what made her famous wasn't just the condition itself, it was how it was presented. She was placed inside a carefully designed setup, with mirrors, lighting, and machinery that made her appear alive, headless, and unexplainably still conscious. Her torso would move, her chest would rise and fall, and her limbs would shift slightly, giving the effect of a decapitated but very much alive person. Behind the scenes, Betty was fully in control. She worked inside the rig for hours a day and reportedly earned a solid income doing it. The illusion was terrifying and fascinating. Doctors came to examine it, children stared in disbelief, and it became one of the most talked about acts in sideshow history. Betty wasn't just a part of the show. She was the show. Her stillness, timing, and awareness turned a medical condition into a living performance. Even now, vintage photos of the act still confuse people who swear it couldn't be real. Leonard Tras didn't start life as a spectacle. Born in 1805 in Maine, he lived a simple, working-class life, until a horse-riding accident in his 20s changed everything. His spine was permanently damaged, but the condition kept getting worse. Over time, his back twisted further until he couldn't stand upright. His chin was locked close to his chest, and he had to walk bent almost completely forward. He could no longer work, couldn't lift his head, and suffered constant pain. Most would have disappeared into poverty. Leonard did the opposite. He documented his condition, sold copies of his own autobiography, and even posed for photographs. His story spread through newspapers not because of pity, but because of how visibly unusual his condition was. People couldn't believe that someone could survive in that state, let alone travel and promote their own image. Trask eventually became known as the Wonderful Invalid. He turned his body into a message, not for sympathy but as proof of human endurance. The twisted posture, the locked joints, the unmistakable silhouette, his appearance became iconic. He wasn't a performer, but people were still drawn to him. His portrait remains one of the most bizarre and haunting examples of real physical transformation recorded on camera in the 19th century. Zaro Ali stood out before he even spoke. Deep-set eyes, a long white beard, and a presence that felt ancient. Born in Turkey sometime in the 1700s, or so he claimed, Zaro said he lived to be 160 years old. Whether the number is accurate or not, his story created a sensation. He told reporters he'd met Napoleon, served in multiple wars, and even traveled the world late into his life. The man didn't just age, he multiplied history. He appeared in newspapers across Europe, and the US photos show a thin man with heavily wrinkled skin, standing upright, alert, and conversational. Doctors examined him. Debates followed. No one could fully confirm or disprove his age, but the image of a man that old, still moving and talking, was enough to spark international attention. Zaro didn't live quietly. He gave interviews, met celebrities, and posed proudly in traditional robes. Whether he was 160 or simply very old, the fascination was real. He became a global curiosity not because of records but because of presence, the kind that made people stop and stare, wondering how someone could walk through so many eras and still be here. They appeared out of nowhere. Two children, green-skinned, speaking no known language, wearing clothes that didn't match anything locals had seen. This wasn't modern times, it was 12th century England, in the quiet village of Woolpit. The children said they came from a place with no sun, a world of permanent twilight. That's all they could explain. The boy died young, but the girl survived. As she learned English, she said they got lost underground before stumbling into the surface world. No one could find where they came from, and no one had ever seen skin like theirs. Some believed they were sick. Others thought they were aliens or travelers from a hidden civilization. Over time, the green tint faded, but the legend didn't. Paintings, books, and even modern theories still chase the origin of the green children. They weren't ghosts. They weren't monsters. They were real kids who didn't fit into anything the people of that time understood. And centuries later, we still don't have a clear answer. Julia Noose didn't just have tattoos. She became a walking mural. Known as the most tattooed woman in the world, over 95% of her body was covered in vibrant ink. What made her story more than just colorful skin was how it started. Julia was diagnosed with a rare skin condition that caused her to blister severely when exposed to sunlight. She chose tattoos not just for expression, but as a way to take control of something that had once controlled her. Dragons, castles, movie scenes, portraits. Her body became a canvas of art and survival. She didn't hide from the world, she stood out in it. Julia appeared on TV and documentaries and even in Guinness World Records. People would stare, ask questions, sometimes even doubt it was real. But every inch was carefully crafted, every line a decision. Her presence was intense but not overwhelming. She had a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from turning pain into power. Julia Noose wasn't just tattooed, she was layered with stories, all told in ink and all visible with just a glance. In the quiet roads of western Pennsylvania, a strange figure once walked alone at night. His face was barely a face at all, no eyes, no nose, a twisted mouth. People called him the Green Man. Others whispered his real name, Raymond Robinson. As a child, he climbed a power line and was struck with thousands of volts. The shock left him permanently disfigured. He survived, but his injuries were severe. His facial features destroyed. The damage was so extreme that he avoided going out during the day. Instead, he walked the streets at night, often for miles, completely in silence. Local teenagers began to notice him and gave him the nickname Charlie No Face. Some claimed he glowed, others said he wasn't human. But the truth was simple. Raymond was a real man, living with unthinkable scars, and trying to find peace. Those who dared speak to him discovered he was kind, soft-spoken, even funny. He liked Coca-Cola and didn't mind being approached. The legend made him a monster. But Raymond never did anything monstrous. He became a ghost story by accident, a real man, walking in the dark, misunderstood by almost everyone who passed him. She had no arms, no legs, but Violetta didn't sit in the shadows, she took center stage. Born Aloysia Wagner in Germany, she had a rare condition called tetra amelia, meaning she was born without all four limbs. Most people would assume a life of silence and stillness followed. Violetta proved them all wrong. She became a traveling performer, not just an exhibit but a star. She appeared in sideshows across Europe and America, carried with dignity and framed in grace. In every photo, her posture is upright, her head is held high, she signed autographs using her mouth, she spoke confidently to curious visitors, and most of all, she redefined what people thought was possible. Spectators came expecting pity. They left stunned by her elegance and control. She didn't hide behind curtains or play up shock. She wore elegant dresses, posed for portraits, and challenged the standards of what beauty and ability looked like. Her presence was so strong that even decades later her images stopped people mid-scroll. Her body may have been missing limbs, but nothing about her was small. Violetta didn't need arms to hold attention. She did it just by being exactly who she was. Before she was even a teenager, Josephine Bois Deschênes had grown a thick, dark beard, longer than most grown men's. Instead of being hidden or ridiculed by her family, she was embraced and given the stage name Madame Clofulia. Born in Geneva in 1827, she had a condition that caused her to grow a full beard by age 8. At first, she was simply a curiosity, but her striking look, part Victorian lady, part full-bearded gentleman, made her famous. Her beard grew over 6 inches long, and she would part it, curl it, and sometimes even tie ribbons in it. By the time she joined P.T. Barnum's American Museum in New York, she had already toured half of Europe. But her fame didn't just come from her appearance. She carried herself like royalty. In gowns, corsets, and jewelry, she took photos that looked more like portraits of nobility than sideshow flyers. People came expecting to gawk. Instead, they found themselves admiring her confidence, her poise, her undeniable beauty. Clofulia wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply being seen, and she made sure the world saw her the way she chose to be remembered. He couldn't speak. He didn't recognize his own name. He walked on all fours and refused to wear clothes. When hunters discovered him in the woods of Germany in 1725, Peter the Wild Boy didn't look like someone raised by humans. He was filthy, barefoot, and survived by eating raw plants and whatever he could find. The King of England heard the story and brought Peter to court, not to be studied, but to be shown off. He became a living mystery. Was he raised by animals? Had he escaped from somewhere? No one ever figured it out. He never learned to speak more than a few basic words. He never explained his past, but he became famous across Europe. Artists painted his image. Royals brought him to parties. People wanted to see the boy who didn't belong. Peter's green eyes, wild hair, and awkward movements fascinated the public. He lived well into adulthood under royal care, walking in circles endlessly, still untamed. Some believe he may have had Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, a condition unknown at the time, but even with today's knowledge, his early life remains unsolved. He didn't speak, but he made the world listen. He stood just 29 inches tall, but George Washington Morrison Nut had the confidence of someone 10 times his size. On stage, he was known as Commodore Nut, a performer who shared the spotlight with P.T. Barnum's top star, General Tom Thumb. But Nut wasn't just a sidekick. He had charisma, timing, and the rare ability to win over crowds instantly. He danced, sang, and posed proudly in military-style outfits, complete with gold-trimmed jackets and tall boots. His performances weren't just about size, they were about presence. Barnum recognized that, and turned Nut into a household name. He performed for President Lincoln, toured Europe, and appeared in grand parades beside Tom Thumb, who he actually didn't get along with off stage. That rivalry only made things more interesting. Fans picked favorites. Newspapers followed every detail. And Nut, always in uniform, became a living symbol of confidence and charm packed into a tiny frame. He didn't ride fame quietly, he embraced it. Whether standing beside giants or royalty, he held his ground and smiled for the camera. Commodore Nut proved that performance wasn't about stature. It was about style, and he had plenty of it. Jean Libra didn't just share the stage, he shared his body. Born in 1884 in Italy, Jean had one of the rarest physical conditions ever documented, a parasitic twin named Jacques, permanently attached to his abdomen. Jacques had a partially formed face, shoulder and arm, not a complete person but enough to be seen, enough to move slightly. Doctors were fascinated, crowds were stunned. Jean wasn't just a man, he was two bodies in one, fused together in a way that seemed impossible. He lived a full life, touring across Europe and the United States, performing in medical exhibitions and circus shows. He would stand on stage, shirtless, calmly presenting the motionless form of his twin. It wasn't violent, it wasn't dramatic, it was eerie. Jacques never spoke, never reacted, but he was visible in every photo. Jean, despite carrying an extra life on his stomach, lived into his 30s and stayed in good health. The condition is almost never seen today. Surgeons can usually remove parasitic twins in infancy. But back then, Jean lived with his brother's body his entire life. He didn't just show up and shock people, he became one of the most unforgettable human anomalies of his century. In 1877, a teenage girl named Rosa Matilda Richter stepped into a cannon. Not for a photo, but for launch. She was just 14 years old, performing under the name Zazil, and she became the first person in history to be shot from a cannon as part of a live show. The act was terrifying even in theory. But Zazil made it real. She climbed into a spring-powered cannon in front of a roaring audience at the Royal Aquarium in London, and was fired through the air, landing in a safety net. No tricks, no illusions, just physics, courage, and spectacle. Her small size and acrobatic skill made her the perfect fit. She didn't just fly once, she repeated the stunt hundreds of times, traveling with circuses and attracting huge crowds. People couldn't look away. They had never seen a human move through the air like that without injury. And for a long time, they only saw it from her. Eventually, injuries from the force of the landings caught up with her and she retired. but the image of a young girl being blasted into the sky became part of circus legend. Zazil didn't just fly. She launched a whole new kind of performance. Martin Van Buren Bates wasn't just tall. He was enormous in every direction. Born in Kentucky in 1837, he grew rapidly from childhood and reached a staggering height of nearly 8 feet. But it wasn't only his height that turned heads. His build was massive. At over 470 pounds, he was strong, broad-shouldered, and towered above nearly everyone he met. Despite his size, he lived a surprisingly active life. He served as a Confederate officer during the Civil War, where soldiers nicknamed him the Giant of the South. After the war, he joined a traveling show and toured the country as a living marvel. But it was his marriage that made headlines around the world. He married Anna Haining Bates, another true giant who stood over 7 feet 11 inches tall. Their wedding was a public event. Their custom-made bed was nearly 10 feet long and 8 feet wide. Thousands came to see them. Photographers documented their quiet, dignified expressions. They weren't circus caricatures. They were a couple living a very real, very large life. Tragically, both of their children died shortly after birth, likely due to complications related to size. Still, Martin lived into his 70s, far longer than most people with gigantism. His portrait remains one of the most striking in 19th century photography, a man so tall that even full-grown adults barely reached his waist. Maryanne Beavenon was once a nurse, a mother of 4, and known in her community for her kindness and hard work. But after developing acromegaly in her 30s, her body began to change rapidly. Her jaw thickened, her forehead grew, and her facial features became distorted. The disease, caused by excess growth hormone, didn't just alter her appearance, it changed the course of her life. After her husband died, Maryanne struggled to support her family. When she saw an ad for an Ugliest Woman contest, she entered not for attention but for survival. She won. From there she joined a sideshow billed under that cruel title. But behind the posters was a smart, sharp-witted woman who used her role to earn a living and secure her children's future. Photos show her face clearly changed by her condition, but what they don't show is the grit behind her decision. Maryanne never stopped working. She appeared at fairs, on postcards, and eventually at Coney Island. People stared, but she kept going. She didn't let the title define her. What made her truly unusual wasn't her appearance. It was her choice to face the world head-on, even when it stared back. Tom Wiggins was born into slavery in Georgia in 1849, blind, nonverbal, and presumed to be mentally disabled. No one expected him to function, let alone perform. But before he turned 5, he was playing the piano with extraordinary skill. He didn't just play songs. He recreated entire pieces after hearing them once. By 8, he was composing his own music. Audiences couldn't believe what they were hearing. A blind black child who couldn't speak yet could sit at a piano and perform with the precision of a trained master. He became known as Blind Tom, and by the age of 10, he was touring the country, playing for sold-out crowds. Some doubted it was real. But time after time he delivered, mimicking complex pieces, imitating sounds, playing multiple songs in different styles, even creating thunderstorms and train noises using only piano keys. His memory was nearly photographic. He could recite long speeches after hearing them once. Crowds called him a genius, others called him a phenomenon. He didn't need to speak. His music said everything. Though he never gained independence and remained under guardianship his entire life, Tom Wiggins left behind a legacy that still stuns pianists and historians. He wasn't just rare, he was one of a kind. Sarah Biffin was born in England in 1784 without arms or hands. In an era when people with disabilities were hidden or ignored, she became a respected artist, known for her precise, detailed miniature portraits, all painted using her mouth. At a young age she was exhibited at fairs as a curiosity. But what caught people's attention wasn't just her physical condition. It was what she could do in spite of it. She wrote, sewed, drew, and painted, using specially designed tools she held between her teeth. Her ability to create lifelike portraits on tiny ivory surfaces amazed everyone who saw her work. Critics thought it had to be a trick, but she demonstrated her skill live, proving it was real. Her breakthrough came when the Earl of Morton noticed her talent and funded her formal art education at the Royal Academy. Soon, Sarah was taking commissions from the British elite, including members of the royal family. Her signature appeared in the corner of delicate watercolors, created with a brush no bigger than a pin, all guided by movements of her lips, neck, and jaw. She became a full-time artist, not a sideshow performer. Her work still exists today, carefully preserved in museums and collections. Sarah Biffin didn't just overcome the limitations of her body, she mastered a craft many with full ability never achieve, and she did it with nothing but fierce precision and pure will. Joseph Borlasi was barely over 3 feet tall, but everything else about him was larger than life. Born in 1739 in Poland, he was well-educated, well-mannered, and fiercely intelligent. Unlike many little people of his time who were forced into degrading performances, Joseph chose a different path. He embraced nobility. Dressed in fine clothes and speaking multiple languages, he toured the royal courts of Europe, not as a spectacle, but as a guest. He played music, debated politics, and charmed queens and emperors. Wherever he went, he left an impression. He wasn't carried or hidden. He walked into rooms with confidence and left with admirers. He wrote a memoir, ran in aristocratic circles, and became known not as a curiosity, but as a gentleman. In an age where physical difference often meant social exclusion, Joseph turned his stature into a symbol of uniqueness rather than limitation. He lived to be nearly 100 years old, outliving many of the royals who once applauded him. Today, a life-size statue of him stands in Durham, England. Not tucked away in a museum corner but proudly displayed in public. He wasn't a circus act or an oddity. He was Count Borlasi, a rare example of someone who defied every expectation history had for him. Joseph Borlasi stood small in stature but tall in legacy. Just like every rare soul in this video. From giants to cannonballs, their stories prove one truth: extraordinary is real. That's about it. Write in the comments which of these people impressed you the most. For more useful information, watch other videos.